Football's back, but that also means that betting is back. And one of my favorite conversations each week during this season is with Steve Merrill from Pro Sports Info. Please check him out right there at prosportsinfo.com. Steve has joined us for the last several college football seasons into the NFL playoffs to set you straight on the betting lines and give us some tips on how you can make a little money possibly on the side. But again, join Steve for the in-depth information on all the games, not just college football, the NFL, of course, starting as well, and baseball and the NBA continue at prosportsinfo.com. All right, Steve, we get to dive right back into it a couple of weeks later than we anticipated from the college football standpoint with the ACC and the Big 12 as they get going. The attractive non-conference matchups are gone. We're right into ACC conference play, so we're going to put the Big 12 on hold, at least in terms of this segment, with no conference matchup. So we've got Syracuse at North Carolina. A lot of people love the Heels coming in off of what Mack Brown accomplished in his first season as a 23-point favorite at home against the Orange.
Yeah, and obviously people are definitely back in North Carolina. They like them, as you said, because this line opened around 19 a week ago. Now 22.5, 23. Those are both dead numbers, obviously, so would not be surprised to see maybe it get all the way up to that key number of 24 by the time it kicks off. I think it's too high. My power ratings make this game about a touchdown less, though. So I do think North Carolina is overvalued at this spot. I do feel they'll win the game. They are the better team, obviously. But I don't think there's any value at this current number, especially if it gets as high as 24. Not sure I'm going to come in with the underdog necessarily just because of the line value. I think one thing I will say, Mark, I think these lines are going to be very inaccurate in week one, both NFL and college. We never have a preseason in college football, but they've had less practice than ever on top of that now in August. We've seen some really crazy results, as you know, back in week 1A. You look at an Army triple option, they've had a month to prepare. They go out there, they're up, 45-0. Then the very next 2 days later, Navy's down 45-0, running the exact same offense. So it shows every team is an individual case study. By the way, one thing I took away from that Navy game was they weren't ready to play, obviously, and the coaches said they didn't do a lot of tackling. He was trying to keep them healthy in practice. So read between the lines on a lot of these situations. That's why we're going to see some crazy line moves in a lot of these games as well. We saw one here, but I think it's overvalued. I would lean towards the dog here, even though I think North Carolina is a better team. I'd lean towards Syracuse just based on the points, especially if it hits plus 24 or more.
Yeah, that first week in the group of five also produced a couple of 3-touchdown favorites in Memphis and SMU that had to struggle just to get to the finish line for a win. And then also, of course, Southern Miss taking on a South Alabama team that had lost 15 consecutive games on the road. Not only don't cover the 14, but they lose outright by double digits themselves. Got Steve Merrill on the line, prosportsinfo.com. And before we set everyone up with the final two ACC selections, Steve, with that point in mind about the crazy unpredictability, that 3-point home field advantage that is so common for the betting public, how do we see that playing out, and how is Vegas treating that?
Yeah, one thing I want to bring up too about North Carolina is, they're a 23.5-point favorite. They're only about 14-1 on the money line. That might sound like a big payoff. You're getting like 11-1 on the underdog, but normally you've seen a 3.5 touchdown spread. I would gather to say the underdog's going to be more than 11-1. So as you said, those big favorites struggled in week one. I would be very cautious playing big money lines, for example. If you like an underdog in some of these games, maybe sprinkle a little on the big 10-1 payoff. We're going to see some upsets. We're also going to see teams win by 40 like we saw last week. But, Mark, I think the home field analogy is a great one. I've always said college basketball has the biggest home court advantage. NBA probably close because the officials are influenced more by the crowd noise, the small settings. But obviously football has a home field edge as well, especially when it gets loud, fourth quarter, game on the line. The opposing team can't hear the call. They can't hear the signals. That's not an issue anymore. And you could make an argument travel is difficult now with the whole COVID situation. But then again, the airports aren't that busy. I don't think travel is going to be an issue. So I do think home field will be less worthy than it's ever been in the past. Of course, we also have to do our research on these. 5 to 6 NFL teams are going to allow fans here early on. A lot of the other ones probably will next month. College football is doing the same thing. It's a game-by-game adjustment. And most of these stadiums are not allowing fans, but some are allowing 20% occupancy. So it's once again, it's a dynamic situation, but I am factoring less home field advantage, very, very little. As you said, it's normally about 3 points. I think you can make an argument maybe it's one just because of familiarity of the settings, and I'm not even sure that's the case anymore. And I'm going to learn a lot. Very rarely would I adjust my Saturday night handicapping based on the Saturday afternoon results, but it really is a game-by-game approach. Yet, with that said, you have to be careful not to overreact to just 5 or 6 games because it's a small sample size. But as you said, a lot of weird results back in week 1A, big favorites struggling, teams blowing out teams. I think we're going to continue to see that this weekend.
Another adjustment to the season, of course, Notre Dame's entry into the ACC, eligible to win its championship, and they will face Duke in South Bend here in week 1 or 2, however you look at it. The Irish a 20-point favorite, 20 to 20.5 at home.
Yeah, and by the way, just looking at future odds, Clemson a 1-3 favorite to win the ACC conference. Notre Dame 4-1, Miami of Florida 8-1, North Carolina, we just spoke about, 10-1. Everybody else, Virginia Tech, Florida State around 20. Everyone after that's 30-1 or higher. So other than North Carolina, it's really Clemson, Notre Dame, and Miami of Florida, according to the odds makers, that can win this conference. And as you said, Notre Dame is eligible now for the first time. I like them in this game. I like them this season overall. This is a team that's 23-3, I think, or 21-3 the last couple of years, 31-6 or 33-6 the last 3 years. I mean, they've been on the edge of being a national title contender. And now with those 2 power conferences out of the mix, especially the Big Ten, the Pac-12 is usually out of the mix, but the Big Ten always throws somebody in there, normally Ohio State. I think it opens up the door for Notre Dame to be in the Final Four as well. They have a much better shot. And for that reason, I think they're going to play hard this year. I think they're excited about the season. And I would take a look at them here in this game. It's a big number, but as you mentioned, it's still below that key number of 3 exact touchdowns at 20-20.5. 21 or more, obviously, it becomes a bit pricey. But right now, 20-20.5, I like Notre Dame in this one, laying less than 3 touchdowns.
Georgia Tech obviously had to institute a completely different offense, terminology, a whole transformation of the roster and so forth under Jeff Collins in year number 1. It was a rough ride at 3-9, just 1 win in the conference, taking on Florida State on the road. First-year head coaches always have a full off season to implement new system, structure, culture, terminology, build relationships, do all those things. Not this year, though. They certainly had to do most of that virtually. So you got Mike Norvell as a first-year head coach at Florida State, at home as a 12.5-point pick against Georgia Tech.
Yeah, by the way, Georgia Tech dead last in the conference futures, as you would expect. Can I interest you at 250-1 on Georgia Tech to win the ACC? You don't think 1 out of 250 times they'd pull it off? It tells you something. By the way, Wake Forest is second to last, but Syracuse and Duke both at 100-1. The teams we just talked about as the opponents in those games. So these are some mismatches this week in week 1. I don't think they did that by purpose. Maybe they did. They obviously don't want the big boys playing right out of the gate. But yeah, this is an interesting game, though, because I really would like to find a reason to use Florida State, because I just don't think Georgia Tech is there yet. They're trying to get rid of that triple option attack. They really struggled last year. They did alternate point spread wins and losses their last 6 games of the season, but they were still 3-7-1 against the spread. Florida State 4-7 against the spread last year. They've been a losing straight up team now for back-to-back seasons. So it's not like this is a powerhouse anymore. Yet Norvell really did work some magic in Memphis, his other stops. But as you said, Mark, he just hasn't had a full offseason to prepare. Normally I'd say, well, 2 teams that aren't prepared, you take the better team, the more talent, the better recruiting classes. And I still think that's Florida State, but it's not like it used to be. I don't know. This is a tough call here. I'd like to do something maybe with the over because Florida State's defense has been so bad in recent years. But then again, both teams, as you mentioned, Georgia Tech still switching over from a triple option. That offense isn't there yet. Florida State hasn't had a lot of time to put their offense in place. This is a really tough call. My gut is saying take the better program, the better powerhouse team, and Florida State laying less than 2 touchdowns. But then again, Florida State has been so bipolar the last couple of years. Who knows how this season is going to play out with them?
Got Steve Merrill on the line from ProSportsInfo.com. It's been a long off season, but Steve joins us each and every college football season on into the NFL playoffs to break down the betting odds and the 3 biggest games of the week, which this fair doesn't match up with the typical roundup of games. Obviously, the SEC is 2 weeks away, and the Big Ten and the Pac-12 sitting out at this point. But we've got what I look forward to, Steve, is your wild card game, something under the radar, maybe in the group of 5 that you really like as a possible lean.
Yeah, a lot of times we'll be using some Sun Belt games. Maybe I'll throw in some FCSs. I love to dive into the 1AAs. A lot of them aren't playing, but there are some mixed in there. And this week, it's kind of a mid-major, I guess, against another ACC. We'll keep with this ACC theme, and I'm going to look at Louisville and Western Kentucky. This is actually the only non-conference game for Louisville all season. They have Miami of Florida on deck next week, a really big game. So you could make an argument maybe they're caught looking ahead. Maybe they kind of go vanilla here. But the point spread's only 11.5, maybe as high as 12 in some spots. So Western Kentucky coming off a surprising 9-4 season with their first-year coach last year, really played better than expected. And Louisville's played them the last couple years. And last year they played in Nashville on a neutral field. Louisville was only a 10-point favorite. They won by 17, 38-21. Both teams basically returned the same lineups from last year. And, Mark, that game was 31-7 at the half. Western's only scores a 77-yard touchdown pass. I go back and rescore the games based on the drive charts, how teams move the ball. For example, I don't give them a full 7 points for a 77-yard touchdown pass because they didn't really move the ball at all in the other drives. My rescore coincidentally came out to 31-7 for the game, and that was actually the halftime score, just a pure coincidence. But Louisville really dominated that game. I know Western got better as the season went on, but so did Louisville. They had the nice 18-point bowl win last year. My only concern here would be the look ahead to Miami of Florida. But I think Louisville is ready to play here, and I think laying less than 2 touchdowns, they're worth a look. And interesting angle, by the way, so far in week 1A, teams that had a substantial week or more of spring practice went 4-0 straight up against their opponents. And now that's a small sample, but Louisville had 7 spring practices. Western had 0. Now, I know they both have been practicing for the past month, but even that extra week back in the spring in such a strange situation now has seemed to make a difference. And you talk about an off-the-radar game. I'm at wagertalk.com now, and Ralph Michael is one of my cohorts there. He does a great statistical analysis. He pointed this out to me. Coastal Carolina this week has the biggest dichotomy against any opponent. I think they had plus 15 more spring practices than Kansas. So we'll see how that plays out. And that's another, I'll make it an extra off-the-radar game for you. But it's an angle that's interesting to cover. Once again, 4-0 so far in week 1A. We'll see how that plays out here in the next week. I'll make an argument, though, you could say it was more beneficial last week, Mark, because now everybody's had an extra week of practice. So maybe last week that extra spring was more important than it is going forward. So that's not a reason to use a game, but it's maybe a filter if you're kind of on the fence on a couple of these.
Check out my game-by-game predictions for the entire 2020 season with all the ACC and SEC teams. Those videos are posted right here. And as I keep preaching, Steve, based on and I've got the expert right here. I just pick up some nuggets from time to time. I've been charting the last 3 years, and in the top 25, about 22 to 23% of the games are straight up upsets.
Yeah. And we've talked about that the last couple of seasons here. And, I mentioned earlier in this segment, hey, look at the money line on some of these underdogs. And as you said, Mark, it happens in regular years. And as we both agree, this is not a regular year. So I think even more so both NFL and college football, if you like an underdog on the point spread, you want to put some of it on the money line. And, hey, look, you got to be taking a long-term investment. My clients and I take a long-term investment. We're not living and dying by daily single-game results. You're gonna lose a little bit on games sometimes where they would have covered, but they don't win straight up. That's why I like splitting it on both the point spread and the money line, just from an emotional hedge perspective. But hey, 7-point dog, you're getting a 2 or 3 to 1 payoff sometime, and they're going to win a lot of those games straight up. Long term, you will make more money by putting some of your underdog plays partially on the money line.
Steve Merrill joining us. Steve, let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, website, prosportsinfo.com, and I reference wagertalk.com. It's a new site I'm doing a lot of videos on. I do a daily NBA show, NASCAR, also baseball, so not just football. We'll be doing that as well. Wagertalk.com for videos, WagerTalk TV on YouTube. But prosportsinfo.com is the best site for me. My personal best bets are there each and every day. Call, text, email me. You can contact me directly if you have any questions, prosportsinfo.com.
Steve, good to see you, and hopefully we'll have a good season together looking at all the college football matchups week to week.
Thanks, Mark.